My name is Alec Tritton. I'm Chairman of the Household Trust and Chair of the Secret Lives Conference. With me today is one of our speakers, Sue Swalwell, and Sue will be giving 2 talks at the Secret Lives Conference. Hi Sue, how are you?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
The first one I understand is going to be called True, Public and Notorious, a Case of Georgian Abuse and Victorian Divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So in that you mentioned the Border Courts. What are the Border Courts?
The Border Courts are essentially the church courts, the ecclesiastical courts, and they tended to deal with cases or complaints between people of, could be about sex, it could be slander, it could be defamation, it could be marital breakdown, it could be an argument over a will or a dispute within a family in terms of it. But they tend to give you quite lurid details and quite detailed commentary from the local community and gives you a real assessment of how your ancestors were seen by the others in the community.
Okay, I can understand that when we're talking about divorce or adultery, that is obviously going to involve somewhere along the line, in fact probably quite often more than one, a wife and maybe another one. But what about all the other types of criminal, or shall we say, they're not so much criminal, are they? They're more moral.
Yes.
Moral events.
Yeah.
Do you find much incidence of women in them?
In terms of the ones I've looked at particularly, they've been certainly within the defamation area, because I think in the area that I'm dealing in North Yorkshire, it wasn't known for the Fisher wives of Whitby to actually have a go about each other's behaviour. So there's quite a lot of detail in terms of there. But also in the testament, the will disputes as well, there's quite a lot of detail about the women, particularly where the women were executors. And quite often you would find that brothers or uncles would then challenge what they were actually doing as executors and whether they'd lied about the value of the goods and not given out the fair share to the rest of the family.
So where do you find these records of Border Courts?
The ones I've particularly focused on are actually the York ones. So they are kept at the Borthwick Institute of York, and they have a very good index online which actually includes not only the names of the people, the parties who are bringing the case and the defendant, but also the witnesses, the proctors who are involved in it, and also just anybody who's mentioned in there. And it also includes places. So even if you don't think your ancestor's going to be there, it's worth looking in terms of the village or the town they lived, because it will give you a background context for the community in which they were living as well.
And is this just places in Yorkshire or throughout the whole country?
Oh no, it covers quite a lot of places actually, because it was a lot about where, because I've certainly come across ones where actually it dealt with Durham, because Durham was overseen by York in terms of the church courts, but other places as well. And so it relates, it's quite a the ecclesiastical court structure is quite complicated. So within York you will find details, if you go back far enough, even of the Isle of Man. So it is quite detailed. I've also come across cases where it actually involves people in America.
Crikey, right, okay. Well, presumably they were before 1778, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, yeah. And did you actually use any other records? Have you sort of found any other records?
Yeah, no, because basically the other thing is that they're great as a springboard to other records, because they give you details. So normally a witness is described with an age, so stated age. They're often actually very detailed in terms of describing exact relationships between one named person and the next, so you can establish parentage, you can establish marriage, and it just gives you lots of details, and lots of details of neighbours or property will get mentioned as well, which actually moves between, and then you can go look at things like the property deeds and follow and track those as well. But it takes you into censuses, it takes you into things like property records, as I've said, but also births, marriages, deaths, all those kind of things within that context. So they're great in that.
And are you talking about one specific case?
Yes, I am. I'm talking about a particular lady who was married in the early 1830s and had quite a hard marriage, and it is described in great detail in terms of the detail of the physical abuse that she received from her husband, including attempts to kill her, etc., etc., and includes graphic descriptions of her husband's adultery, including having sex in one of the pubs in Whitby.
Right,
So
okay.
they're great reads.
An early form of Lady Chatterley's lover.
Yes, indeed, yes, that's right. But it's interesting because in those days, so the lady who brought this particular case, she had actually left her husband in 1837, but didn't actually apply to the courts for what the papers at that stage described as divorce, but was actually more strictly separation from bed and board, until 1848.
Right.
And so part of the fascination is trying to understand why she waited so long, what was the causes, what was influencing it, because in the 1840s attitudes were starting to change to how divorce was granted. Was she emboldened by that? Because she was literally the first person in her parish who'd ever done that. The first person ever in Whitby, in Lythe parish it was, to actually try and separate from her husband. And the title of the talk comes from True, Public and Notorious, comes from what is actually written in the allegations of it, which is actually, she asserts what her husband has done in terms of mistreating her. At the end of each phrase of allegation against him, it just writes True, Public and Notorious. So it's basically what the community said and believed to be true, which became the most influential thing in the decision of the court.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. Now, you're also giving a second talk, I understand. This second talk is actually called Hiding in the Chantry Cupboard, The Trials and Tribulations of an 18th Century Wife. What do you mean by Chancery Cupboard?
Chancery Cupboard, the Chancery records were really the records of the Chancery Court, and which was largely, was about disputes over money above a certain value, but more typically in terms of land and property. And that's what's involved in this particular case. I'd always been put off. I'd always felt actually that the Chancery probably wouldn't be something that I would find anything of interest in terms of my family, because they tended to mainly be ag-labs and progressed only latterly to earning property. But when I started doing my one-name study into the Swalwell surname, I did the archetypal thing of just extracting any entries of the Swalwell name in various catalogues at various archives, including the National Archives. And there came up Elizabeth Swalwell living at Handale Abbey, near Loftus, in Yorkshire. And coincidentally, I grew up on the farm next to the location of Handale Abbey. And our family moved there over 200 years later without ever knowing that there'd been a Swalwell connection.
Right.
So I was suddenly fascinated by, who was this Swalwell? But also I have a brick wall in North Yorkshire with a Swalwell heritage and ancestry in something like 1761. And these records were dated kind of early 1700s. And I thought, eureka, this could be the breakthrough I'm looking through in terms of my brick wall. Sadly, that hasn't worked out to be the case in terms of I haven't linked to my family, but it has told a fascinating story about family feuds. And in Chancery, there are probably about at least 8 cases involving this lady, which involves things like her stepson taking her to court. It then follows by her son taking her to court. It also involves her sister taking her to court in terms of disputes over the very land that I grew up on, which has just been a joyous piece of research to undertake because of that. It's about personal connection.
Sounds fascinating. So this case study is about a woman with the same surname who isn't actually related.
Yeah, and then in fact the connection ultimately proves the connection with the Swalwells was through her third marriage. Her original name was Elizabeth Moon, who came from a village close by to where I grew up, and she married 3 times. The first was the very prosperous and cited in Dugdale's Visitations Beckwith family, who lived in Handale and owned most of the land at that stage.
don't give it all away.
And that's right.
We want to make sure that people come to see your lecture.
And progressively, she went downhill. To be so fair.
So, when this farm you moved to, were your parents livestock farmers?
They were mixed farmers, so it's about 100
So
years.
you may not be related, but some of your animals could be descendants of
Well,
someone.
but the other fascinating thing about the Chantry records is actually they give field names.
Right.
And actually some of the field names that are cited in the Chantry records are exactly the field names that my mum would say to me when I was taking out the teas to the harvest field. Take that over to the far field where the men are working, and they're written in the Chantry records, still using the same name.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah,
So.
it just goes to show, doesn't it, really, that what you can find out from such records, how close they are to your own family.
Yes, and I think sometimes we talk these days about people being very focused in their research objectives, and I think sometimes going off-piste with your research and just meandering through records actually is where you find the best gems, and often in the most unexpected places, and that's the real joy, I think, of doing research and going into the archives and looking at those rolls from Chantry and opening them up and looking at them actually as if, and when you untie the knot and it feels like you're the first person to untie it from when it was tied. I think it's just one of the things that makes me so passionate about doing this.
Good. Now, you're spending the whole weekend at the conference.
I certainly am.
And what made you want to come and be at this conference?
Because I think all of us, to a large extent, when we're researching, are looking for the stories of our family, not the facts about our family. And we often underestimate, I think, what you can find out about them. And I think the topic of secret lives and what people have managed to unearth will just be inspirational. I think it'll give us all lots of ideas about where to look for things, what we might be able to find out, and just tell a much more interesting narrative about ordinary people.
And is there any particular lecture you're looking forward to?
Oh, so many. That's my problem. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to them. Well, there's obviously with the bawdy courts, I'm kind of quite interested in some of the ones about the ladies of the night. I think it'll be quite interesting. But also things like the slave trade and the use of DNA and how that's led some of the speakers into that. Of course, the spy is quite interesting as well. I mean, Nick Barrett, I'm sure, would be a good one. But so I think there's just too many, really. So we'll be spoilt for choice. We'll be spoilt for choice. But I do think that whole issue about what you can learn about the lives of our ancestors rather than just the facts of it, I think, is actually what will make it a great conference.
Great stuff. Sue, thank you very much.
My pleasure.